to see you on the Tuesday before Purim. So just to point out, obviously, that Thursday is the fast of Esther, and in Johannesburg, the fast of Esther begins at 4:49 a.m. and it concludes at 7 p.m. in Johannesburg. On Tainus Esther in the morning, obviously, you have all the different aspects of the fast, and we have the Torah reading, and we also, at Mincha, we do Machzis HaShekel, as we discussed at the portion of Shkolim, and that is because in the times of the temple, every Jew would give a half a shekel in order to participate in the public sacrifices, and so we have that custom on Tainus Esther before Mincha. That money usually goes to tzedakah, and I know in our shul we're davening Mincha just at Shkia at 6:30, followed by 7 Ma'ariv and Megillah. And then Friday is Purim itself. It's an unusual day of the week for Purim to fall out. We all know the 4 mitzvahs related to Purim. That is to hear the Megillah on the night of, which is Thursday night, and the morning, which is Friday. So that's the one mitzvah. The other mitzvah is Matonos Lavyonim, to give gifts to a poor. And there are many organizations that one can give it through, the Chevra Kadisha, the Yad Aron, and others who will do it on your behalf, Simcha Shabbos Yom Tov, if you don't know of any poor personally. And the third mitzvah is Mishloach Manot, to send gifts to another, a man to a man, a woman to a woman, and it's customary to try and send at least 2 foods ready to eat with different blessings, and the other is to have a Purim Feast. Now, generally, the Purim Feast usually takes place late in the afternoon towards evening, but as it's Friday, a person should have their Seudah Purim in the early afternoon so that it doesn't interfere with your Shabbos meal. So that's the laws of Purim. If we have time, we'll discuss a little teachings and explanations on Purim. This Shabbos, we only take out 1 Torah, which is always the Shabbos after Purim, and the other of the 4 weeks, that will take place a bit later in the month of Adar. I'd also like to just point out that Shushan Purim is Shabbos, and Shushan Purim, the day after Purim, as everybody knows, is celebrated in Jerusalem, and so it's called a Purim Mishloach, a 3-day Purim, because they have like Friday, Shabbos, and they keep the Purim on Sunday, as they can't do it on Shabbos in Jerusalem. So that's called a 3-day Purim. And well, as I say, if we have time, we'll discuss more about that later. Let's go to the portion of the week, which is the portion of Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh is in the Chumash. It is chapter 27, verse 20 and 21, and only then does it start chapter 28. So obviously the Jewish division is a little different to the other divisions, because, as you know, the chapters and verses did not come from Judaism, but from the Greeks, and they separated it a bit different to we do. Now, everybody knows that Tetzaveh is a unique portion. What makes it unique, it is that from the time the Torah relates about Moshe Rabbeinu's birth till the end of the Chumash, Moshe is mentioned countless times in the Torah. There is not really one portion that doesn't contain Moshe Rabbeinu's name many times, with the exception of Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh is the only portion in which you will not find Moshe Rabbeinu's name. The question is, why not? The Baal HaTurim answers that when a tzaddik makes a statement, even if he makes it conditional, it has an impact and an effect. Just to give you an example, we know that when Joseph told his brothers that they cannot come back to Egypt without Benjamin, and they went back to Jacob to tell him about that, Judah told Jacob, I am personally responsible to bring Benjamin back. If I don't succeed in bringing him back, I will have sinned to you. I will be accountable to you, in this world and in the next world. I will not find peace. Now, Judah did bring Benjamin back. Nevertheless, the Talmud says, because he said the words that he will not find peace in the next world, even though he made it conditional, once those words came out of his mouth, it had an impact. And the impact was that when Moshe Rabbeinu was carrying the coffins, the coffins of the 12 tribes, the Talmud says you can hear Judah, so to say, rattling in the coffin to show that he didn't find this peace. And Moshe Rabbeinu had to offer special prayers on behalf of Judah so that he could find peace. And so too, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he pleaded on behalf of the Jewish people, and he asked God to forgive them for the golden calf, he said the words that you have to forgive them. Vim ayin, if you refuse to forgive them, mecheni no misifrecha shekosafta. Erase me, please, from the book that you have written. So he said to God, either you forgive the Jewish people no matter what sin they have committed, or erase my name, God forbid, from the Torah, which shows that even though Moshe was the essence of Torah, Torah is the essence of Moshe, when it came to his love for his fellow Jews, he was ready to go beyond himself completely. Now, God did forgive the Jewish people, but nevertheless, the words of a tzaddik have an impact. And since Moshe Rabbeinu used the words, erase me from the book, so there's a minute amount of that, in that there is a portion which Moshe Rabbeinu is not mentioned. And that is the portion of Tetzaveh, which really is dedicated to the Kohanim. Moshe Zalevi, this portion is dedicated to the Kohanim. The first part of the portion will describe the clothing of the Kohanim, the 8 priestly garments that the Kohen Gadol wore, and the 4 garments that the Kohen wore. And then the rest of the portion will be devoted to the induction of the Kohanim into their service during the Shivat Yemei HaMiluim, the 7 days of induction until Vayhi B'Yom HaShmini, until Rosh Chodesh Nisan, when the tabernacle went into full service. So since this portion is also dedicated to the Kohanim, V'ato Tetzaveh does not have Moshe Rabbeinu's name mentioned into it explicitly. The Rebbe asks, that seems to be like a type of a punishment. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu went through such self-sacrifice by saying, if not, erase me from your book. Why would he deserve such a punishment, not to have his name mentioned in an entire Sidrah? And the Rebbe answers it wasn't a punishment, but rather it was actually, in a way, just the opposite. Because when I refer to myself, that is first person. You is second person, and name is third person. So if you call Moshe, that's third person. In this week's portion, he is referred to. In fact, the first word of the portion is V'ato Tetzave, and you should command. So Moshe Rabbeinu is referred to not in third person, but in second person. So rather than it being a type of a punishment, in fact, it's a blessing that he is even closer because it is in second second person. Why specifically Tetzaveh, in addition to the fact that it is the induction of the Kohanim? Another reason they give is because this portion, Tetzaveh, is usually read on Zion on the week of the 7th of Adar. This year it was Friday. As I say, it's an unusual year. Usually it was last Friday. Usually it's in this week. So Moshe Rabbeinu was born on the 7th of Adar. That's why the Chevra Kadisha have a fast day on it. And he also passed away. That's the reason the Chevra Kadisha have the fast day. He passed away on his 120th birthday on the 7th of Adar. So because he passed away on the 7th of Adar, Tetzaveh usually is in the week of the 7th of Adar. So that's an additional reason why it is Tetzaveh. By the way, Haman, it says, and there's all kinds of teachings about that, Haman was aware that Moshe Rabbeinu had passed away on the 7th of Adar, and therefore he was happy when he heard that the lottery fell out in Adar. He thought it would be an auspicious month to get rid of the Jews, being that Moshe Rabbeinu left the world on that day, and the heavenly voice said, you're forgetting he was also born on that day. Now, let's go into the portion itself. V'ato tetzaves b'nei Yisrael, the portion command, it starts with, and you should command the Jewish people to take shemen zayizoch, pure olive oil, kosis lamo'er, crushed for lighting, to light the menorah. So that this portion starts with the laws of the olive oil that they would use for the menorah. V'ato tetzaveh literally means you should command. According to Chassidus and according to Kabbalah, the word tetzaveh also means from the word tzavtzo v'chiber, to connect. And the word mitzvah actually means to connect. V'ato tetzaveh means that you should connect the Jewish people to the Almighty with the shemen zayizoch. And so the portion of the Kohanim Gedolim, as I mentioned, of the Kohanim, where we talk about their clothing, where we talk about the induction, in our Chumash has a few lines before, talking about connecting the Jewish people to the Almighty through the shemen zayizoch, through the olive oil, and it will conclude with the Menorah, the Mizbeach Hazahav, the golden altar on which they brought the incense. The commentaries wonder, why is the incense altar, the golden altar, at the end of Tetzaveh? All the vessels of the Mishkan were already mentioned in Terumah. And the Rebbe says the connection with the olive oil, which was a very deep connection, and the connection also with the Ketores, which is the incense. That is a very, very strong connection, and the middle portion has to be in between those two. And one of the reasons that the Ketores is considered a stronger connection is that the word for the outer altar, the Mizbeach and the in which they brought all the sacrifices, the word sacrifice in Hebrew is karban. Karban is a sacrifice, but it comes from the word karov, close. The word for incense is ketores. Ketores, as we know from keturah, is to bind up completely. Keturah was Avram's second wife's name, which is Hagar. And the other sacrifices deal with four more physical senses, which is touch, sight, hearing, and taste, whereas the incense is the more spiritual, the fifth sense, which is the sense of smell. We know that the smell is more connected to spiritual than for physical. And so this is not only, this is a higher level to be achieved, not only for to connect us with God, but also for God to dwell within us. And that is achieved by the incense. Now, the Torah tells us that the olive oil for the menorah had to be pure kosis lamor. Rashi, that there are different ways of getting the oil out of the olive. One is called kosis, which is that you press the oil with like beams or whatever, and the oil oozes out. And the other is called teichem berachayim, tchina, to grind the rest of the olive and pips, to grind it in a mill, and the liquid that oozes out is also a type of an oil. By the way, in modern terms, I think that the crushed and beams is called extra virgin oil, and the ground up, the dregs of the olive with the pips and the skin and all that's left over from the crushing, when you grind that, I think that is called pomace oil. Says Rashi that the pure extra virgin oil was used in the menorah to burn through the night, and the ground up was used in the korban menachos. You know, the menachos, the korban mincha, was a flour offering, and the Kohen ate it actually. You brought different measurements of flour depending on what it was for, and you mixed it with, one of the ingredients you mixed it with was with olive oil, and the Kohen ate that. So if you think about this, what is the menorah? The menorah is to burn. What is the mincha? It is that you eat it yourself. Imagine there are some people who light Shabbos candles with olive oil every Friday. Most people do use, for Hanukkah candles, they use the olive oil menorahs. So if you go to the shop on an Erev Shabbos, you're going to use olive oil for your Shabbos candles, and you ended up with two grades at home. One was the extra virgin olive oil that you want to use with your salad dressing or whatever else that you use your olive oil for, and the other is to light the Shabbos candles. What would the average person do when it comes to Shabbos or Hanukkah candles? He say, what difference does it make? It's burning anyway. The fire doesn't care what grade of oil it uses. It burns it, whether it's pomace or virgin. Whereas when I'm taking it, I'm digesting it into my body, I'm ingesting it there, I want the healthiest. So the average person would rather use the virgin oil for his salad dressing and the pomace for his burning. And the Torah says just the opposite. When it comes to the menorah, there it has to be shemen zayizoch. There it has to be the purest of the pure. When it comes to the mincha, that which you are eating, there it doesn't really matter that much. And the Torah's lesson for us all is that the menorah is the spiritual light. We have to start taking spirituality a lot more serious than we do, at least on a par, if not greater, than our physicality. I remember telling you all a story. In 1982, I was the assistant rabbi in Oxford Shul to Rabbi Bernhardt, and one of my responsibilities was teaching bar mitzvah classes. The family will go unnamed. They're very distinguished, wealthy family in Johannesburg, in South Africa, actually. Everybody knows of them. And their son was having a bar mitzvah. I was teaching the bar mitzvah classes. He was a clever kid, but he never came to the lessons. He was always playing hooky. Out of a month, he would come face once and leave three, whatever it was. So then we had the parents teachers meeting, and the parents came with the son, and I had to give them a report. And I said, look, your son is a clever boy, but I have a problem with him. He doesn't show up to any of the cheder lessons. And the father gives the boy a smile, gives him a little pat on the back, and he says, you're a chip off the old block. I remember when it was my bar mitzvah, I also used to play hooky. I used to spend more time on the soccer field than in the cheder class. And they had a laugh. And I remember thinking to myself, what kind of an education are you giving your child? Where are your priorities? What are you teaching him? Can you imagine, had this been a science or maths class or some other field like that, and the parents would come to, and the teacher would say in front of the child, your child is clever, but he's skipping the classes. I don't know if he'll pass his exams. Do you think the parent would say, oh, you're a chip off the whole block, I'm so proud of you? Or would he give him a rebuke and say, listen here, if you want to go far in life, you need an education. You have to pass. Otherwise, you're not going to get the matric. You're not going to get a college. You'll never get a good job. You got to do something about it. Pull your socks up. But when it comes to cheder and spiritual lessons, he's a chip off the old block. Subconsciously, what are you teaching your child? Where your priorities lie? Do your priorities lie with the physical or the spiritual? And this is the introduction to this portion, that the oil for the menorah has to be of the purest of the pure, because that which brightens up our life, our spirituality, we have to teach our children that those should be our priorities in life. If you ask your children, or someone asks their children whom they are happy to confide in, what do you think your parents' priority is for you? Should you succeed spiritually or physically? Would you rather them be a multimillionaire, as Shlomo put it, a doctor on Park Avenue, or a struggling Torah scholar in Jerusalem? What would be their answer as far as you go, what you want for them? And we have to ask ourselves that, and perhaps take the message from this week's portion of the olive oil versus the menachos. And now we start at chapter 28 to bring Aaron close to you with his sons, and Vasiso Bigdei Kodesh you should make holy garments, l'chovod ulesifores. L'chovod ulesifores literally means that they should be for honor and for splendor, for dignity and splendor. And that is that the Talmud says, in your hometown, you are judged by who you are. In a strange town, you are judged by your clothes. A person's clothes, how he wears them, what he's dressed in, says a lot about the individual. And the Torah recognizes that. A uniform seems to carry something special. There are many people who are attracted to individuals in uniform. And the Torah, God Almighty, of course, understands that, and he wants the Kohanim to demand respect even by how they are dressed. And there are many laws about the Kohanim's garments. Amongst them is they had to be proper fitting. They couldn't be too big or too small. They had to be exactly clean. And the Torah will go in to discuss the garments that they wore. And at Mandy's suggestion, I took a few pictures of the garments, and hopefully Yitzchak will be able to share them with the screen. Now, the Torah mentions 6 of the garments that the Kohen Gadol wore: the breastplate, the ephod, the special me'il, a robe, and a ksonas tashbeit, a tunic of checkered knit, a mitznefes, a turban, and a sash. For the tunic, a big belt. The other 2 that are not mentioned is the tzitz, the forehead plate, and the michnasayim, the breeches, the trousers. And these were made, there was a special weave that was made. The weave contained gold, turquoise wool, purple wool, and scarlet wool, and linen. And these were made into threads. So the first one that I have the picture of, maybe he could show it better, is the ephod. And there you see the threads that were made. The threads were 28 strands, 4 gold threads, 1 twined with 6 threads of turquoise wool, the other with 6 threads of purple wool, another with 6 threads of scarlet wool, and 1 with twined linen. And it was a woven design, a different design on both sides. So that is the apron and the belt, and it also had 2 shoulder straps, like that. Now, we have discussed in many a shir a very interesting, unique Rashi. Rashi is the foremost commentary on Chumash, to the extent that the Rebbes, when they organized that we should learn Chitas, a portion of Chumash, Tillim, and Tanya daily, with the Chumash, they said you should learn Rashi. And Rashi, as we know, the Rebbe dedicated many, many parts of his Fabregens to Rashi. The Alter Rebbe says that Rashi is Yenoi Shal Torah, the wine of Torah. It contains all the secrets. Rashi was an amazing commentary. What he did was he went through the entire Torah till his time, written, oral from his teachers. He did not originate any commentaries. No one does. It is from previous generations, previous teachings. Rashi had an amazing pen and had to go through the entire compendium, the entire volumes of Torah, and choose those explanations which will be Ben Chomesh Lemikra, which will bring the explanation to the student of Rashi. Very rarely was Rashi in a bind that he couldn't find any source for his commentary. Yet when it comes to the ephod, this is one of the unique Rashis. She says, I have searched through every part of Torah that I was taught by my teachers, by all the writings I have, and I have not found an adequate description of the ephod. So seemingly I couldn't explain it to you. And then he adds, the libi oimali, that my heart tells me that it is a type of an apron which the women wear in France, wear when they ride horses. And that's what Rashi says, and he describes the whole apron as I showed you. The commentaries find this very strange. What is Rashi saying that my heart tells me it is the apron that the French noble women wear when they ride horses? You know, the French noble women, they used to, what's it called? Side saddle. They had a side saddle on the horse, and they used to wear a special apron. So the commentaries say that a tzaddik like Rashi was totally dedicated and devoted to God Almighty. Most people, if they want to be dedicated to God Almighty, then they know if something is not kosher, God forbid, they will not put it into their mouth. So they try and control their voluntary limbs and all to be dedicated to God's words. Even if they are tempted, they will not disobey the Almighty. A person who is a tzaddik and worked with himself to such a degree and averted himself from anything that is contrary to the Torah, not only had control over his voluntary limbs and parts of his body, but including his involuntary, to the extent there's a story of the Baal Shem Tov that told his Hasidim that there was a certain Chassid, I think Reb Nachman Horodenke, who sat at the back of the shir, that he has developed within himself that his ears don't hear anything but Torah. So if you're speaking Lashon Hara next to him, he won't even hear it. And he said, you'll see, my lips are moving and he can't hear what I'm saying because it's not words of Torah. And the same is with one's eyes. A tzaddik like that has such control, subconscious control over his involuntary item, that when he's walking down the street, his eyes will see what he has to, obviously to look where he's going and not to be in danger. But if there's anything around that, especially that he shouldn't see, he won't see it. And that is the way Rashi knew it was. And one day he is struggling with this portion of the ephod. He has come to that part of the commentary and he doesn't know how to explain it. And perhaps he davened to God for help. as to how to understand and explain the ephod. And that day, when he walked home from wherever he was, his eyes suddenly took in a French noblewoman riding on a horse, and he saw that special robe that she was wearing on the side saddle. And he asked himself, that's strange. I haven't noticed such a thing in years and years. Why all of a sudden did my eyes show me that sight? And he answers, V'libi omali, my heart tells me that there's a Torah reason why I took it in. And the Torah reason is so I should be able to describe the ephod, that it is like a back apron and with a tie that the Kohen Gadol wore. It was very intricate. And then the Torah says that it would have 2 shoulder straps. They show you the straps. And those 2 shoulder straps also had just underneath it, or like on the shoulders, right here, they would have 2 onyx stones called the Avnei Shoyham, very precious stones. Those were extremely expensive. The only ones who had those stones were the Nesiim to give them. And they were 2 rectangular, thank you, Yitzchak. So you have it there, and you see there were 2 rectangular onyx stones, and you had the names of the 12 tribes written on it. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Dan, Naphtali on the one, Gad, Asher, Yisachar, Zvulun, Yosef, Binyamin on the other. We are also told that there were 25 letters on each stone. If you look, you see God there only has 2 letters, but the bottom name Binyamin is written with 2 yuds, and together that adds up to the 25. So Yitzchak, if you could turn over the page, it shows you how they did it, and they put the 2 stones under the shoulder straps with the ephod. Okay, good. And that is how they wore it. Now, besides the ephod and those shoulder straps, there was then a breastplate, and it was called the Choshen Mishpat, the breastplate. And the Torah describes how that was made. Beautiful. On the breastplate, it was a double fold, as you may see there, like you see it's a V. And so you have there the shoulder straps on the Yitzchak's picture. Right underneath the shoulder straps are those 2 onyx stones. Then you had a chain made out of gold, and on the breastplate, they put 12 different stones. Each one stone had a different color. The color of the breastplate of that stone would also be the color on the flags. When the Jews would travel, there would be 4 directions, 3 tribes in each of the 4 directions, and they had each one of the directions had a flag with 3 colors on it, and the colors signified the tribes that were on each side, and those were taken from the 12 stones. Now, the 12 stones had the names of the tribes, and according to the picture there, it went widthwise. So you had Reuven on the top right, Shimon middle, Levi top left, and then going down. These stones had the letters of the names of the tribes, and they also had something called the Urim V'Tumim. According to Rashi, it was a special name of God on parchment that was put in that V. So in between the V there, it was put in. And the Kohen Gadol would ask questions and the letters would light up. The only problem is, if you look at the names of the 12 tribes, there is no Tes there, and there is no Tzaddik in that name. Now, you know that if you're missing any of the letters of the Aleph base, especially if anyone plays Scrabble, you know, if you're missing a couple of letters, you can't do a language. So they actually had additional words on the stones, and that was Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and in Yitzchak you have the Tzaddik, and then they had the words Shiftei Ka, prophets of God, and in the Shiftei you had the Tes. So all the letters were represented there, and I think if I'm not mistaken, there were 6 letters on each stone. So let's say on Levi, they could put more of the name of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And on God, you could put Binyamin in itself had the 6 letters. Now, the breastplate was connected to the ephod, but it couldn't come out. So you have there the connection on the top, and then you also had on the bottom, Yitzchak, if you could go to the next picture, page 221 there, with the breastplate like that, it shows you on the bottom how it was there. On the bottom also it had rings with a cord of turquoise wool, so that it was solid on the top and the bottom. Now, if you look at the next page, this page, it shows you that the Choshen Mishpat was folded over. You see. And the next page is 222, where they have God's name on a piece. There it is. You have God's name on a piece of parchment, and that was put in between. By the way, that only existed in the first temple. Then it was miraculous. We should go into discussing why the first temple was considered so miraculous and why miracles happened. And it was only in the first temple that they had that name of God there, and the letters would light up. By the time the second temple came, they didn't have that parchment anymore. They obviously had the breastplate, but they couldn't ask it any questions, and it didn't light up. Then on the bottom, you had the Me'il. The Me'il is the robe. That was beautiful, sky blue, turquoise wool that was worn. And that had on the bottom there, you see, and there's a better picture on the next page, it had bells and pomegranates. The pomegranate was made out of material, but the golden bell was in between, as you see there, and they made noise. The reason for the noise, there were, by the way, 36 bells and 36 pomegranates on the front of the robe as well as on the back. So they made noise so that the Jews, as well as it says that Hashem would know when the Kohen Gadol is walking in the Beis Hamikdash. And this had to be, this was a very, very beautiful garment that was worn indeed. And then the Torah goes into the tzitz, the forehead plate. And that is the next page. And the Torah talks about the three cords that it had. There is a debate as to how what was not what was written on it. Everybody agrees that the words Kodesh LaHashem were written on it. Some say the Kodesh LaHashem was written on one line, some say on two lines, some say the word Hashem was on top, others say the word Kodesh was on top, but it was surrounding the head with the those three cords for which they tied it. The tzitz, we are told in the Talmud, was meratza. Meratza means it basically got atonement. If anybody had done certain things wrong with the sacrifices, either it was had the wrong thoughts when the Kohen was bringing it, which was a sin in itself, or if it was out of its place, out of its time, then although it was a sin, the tzitz gained atonement for it. It had to be on his forehead, basically in the place where we put on tefillin, and the Kohen Gadol had to be extremely careful, we are told, never to raise his hands above his forehead. That is one of the reasons why the menorah had a three-stepped ladder almost leading up to the menorah, because the menorah was larger than a human being, and by standing on those steps, he wouldn't have to go beyond it. Now, if you go the page before it, Yitzchak, you have those three garments. I think I sent it to you, which is the sash, the belt. It was very, very long, and it was made out of shatnez, wool and linen together. But in the Beis Hamikdash, they were allowed to wear it. It also had the hat. It was basically a long sash made into a hat, and the tunic. Now, he shows you here the page right before that, Yitzchak, on the Hebrew. If you could go back. So it shows you this page. Can you see that one? That one shows you what the Kohen Gadol looked like at the end of the day. So you have here going from the top, you have the mitznefes, the hat. Underneath it is the tzitz, and they show you the back how it was tied. Then, if you look at the bottom of the Kohen Gadol by his feet, where you see the pomegranates and bells, that is the me'il, which is underneath the ephod. So you have the hat, the tzitz, and the me'il. Then you have underneath that you can't see the mechnasayim, the trousers, the breeches. Then you have the ephod, which the front and the back. You have the breastplate, and you have the sash, the belt around him. So those are the 8 garments that he had. The next page that you are showing, notice his hat is made up. It's basically a like an Arab hat, but it's made up of a long ribbon that is shaped a little different to the Kohen. The Kohen's hat was the same material, but it was made more into a cone shape. So you have there the hats, the trousers, those are two. Then you have a beautiful robe that he wore, and the michnas, and the big belt that he wore also. So those are the four garments. By the way, they did not wear shoes. They did not wear jerseys. That was their only things. They didn't have undershirts either, by the way. So those were the 4 and the 8 garments. The Rambam says, don't forget, it just snowed in Jerusalem. And that supposedly is after global warming. So I have no idea what the temperatures were like in Jerusalem during their winters, but I imagine it got quite cold, and that was the only thing they were able to wear, although working in the temple must have been quite warm, especially if you're near the altar, which had continuous fires, but maybe you weren't. And your diet, says the Rambam, was mostly meat rather than other things. So there was a special regiment of doctors needed in the Beis HaMikdash for the Kohanim, because although spiritually they were very high, the conditions that they had to live under were not that great for the physical body. So that's the end of the garments. And then chapter 29, to the rest of the portion, as I say, is the Shivas Yemei HaMiluim, the 7 days of induction. This was what Moshe Rabbeinu served as the first Kohen Gadol. And for the first 7 days, according to Rashi, they took down the tabernacle every night, put it up every morning, and they inducted. They had a whole service of sacrifices, of sprinkling them with oil, anointing them. For the 7 days, you could go through that whole induction service. There wasn't a miraculous time. The fires that would come down from heaven would only start later. And so, as I say, we're getting out of time, so you could go through the whole service of induction. And now we go to chapter 29, verse 38. Oh, sorry. They talk about, yes, in chapter 29, verse 38, is talking about the Korban Tamid. Every day they brought the first sacrifice in the morning is the Tamid Shal Shachris, and the second sacrifice in the afternoon is the Keves Hasheni Ben Harboyim, was the Korban Mincha. They also brought certain other things with it. So there you read about the 2 daily sacrifices. The Torah concludes in chapter 30, verse 1, with the Mizbeach Hazahav. I did not send Yitzchak that picture, but that is the golden altar, and that was in the Mishkan, as we discussed last week. In the Mishkan, you had in the courtyard, you had the outer altar, the Mizbeach HaNecheshes, in which they brought the animal sacrifices. But in the Mishkan itself, you had the table, you had the menorah, and you had the incense altar. And then you had the Holy of Holies, the second part, and that was the and the Mishkan, that altar also had those staves with which they carried it, and that was done with the incense. Half the incense, as we read, there was 365 portions of incense that they ground up, and they brought half a portion in the morning and half a portion in the afternoon to when they lit the menorah. And they discuss many, many different reasons as to why the golden altar is done at the end of the portion. And the Seforno says, because the rest of the tabernacle was to bring God's glory to the Mishkan, but the incense was that it was, so to say, to appease God, that all the services should find favor. And he says, the Or Chaim says that everything that was used in the Mishkan, if they wanted, they could bring it in the temple. So therefore, all those kelim are mentioned there. The one exception is this golden altar. It wasn't pure gold. It was gold plated. It was made out of wood, and there was a plating of gold around it. And this altar was only used for the incense, and it had to be replaced. This was only for the Mishkan. It couldn't be used in the Beis Hamikdash. So we've come to the end of the shir. I'm happy we started with the laws of Purim. I want to wish everyone a freilich in Purim. May you truly reach the level of ad de lo yada. Get out of your boundaries, get out of your limitations. Let us get close to God with mitzvahs, and let us have a good Shabbos. And I wish everyone a freilich in Purim. Let it be. It's now a year since the COVID started. Let God bring redemption in many ways, Mashiach, as well as the end of COVID. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shkayach to everybody.
Thank you.
All the best.